Hi, welcome back. We are the Heretic Sisters. I'm Suzanne. I'm the hopeful heretic. I'm interested in exploring all of the frequencies with the hope of revealing something higher than our limited minds can grasp. Questions I'm always pondering. What is the truth? Can we have both an individual truth and a shared truth? Is it possible to be an individual within a group? What is our individual versus shared responsibilities? Is shared and balanced equity possible?
Hi, I'm Tatiana, and I'm the fearful heretic. I'm all about getting to the bottom of things. I also want to try everything at once. Questions I'm pondering. How does one see reality without distortion? How can we embrace all the blooming complexities of life? How do we express our experiences in creative work? The question, what's it all for, hasn't left me since my teenage years.
So, Tatiana and I have the pleasure of welcoming another 3-5 profile to our show. This time, a sacral generator, an amazing astrologer, Dabney Lawless, who completed a master level astrology certification with the renowned evolutionary astrologer, Steven Forrest. I met Dabney during a mentorship program with another renowned astrologer, Anne Ortley. She's been practicing astrology for over 20 years while also running her own successful PR company. She's a powerhouse, having been published for her astrology knowledge in multiple high-profile magazines and publications. The success that we'll talk about more was hard-earned, as this title suggests. And we talk about that more, but before we do, I want to welcome Dabney to our podcast. Welcome, Dabney.
I love what you did with my bio. You made it sound so much more exciting than I do. So thank you.
I really tried to, I don't know, just write what comes to me about the experience I have of the person. And, I'm pretty honest. So everything that I said was just my observations of you over time. So I'm really glad that you're here with us. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about your astrological journey. How did you first discover astrology? What was your initial experience of success as an astrological writer? What made you first seek out astrology and what pulled you away from it? And all of the good meat about that journey. I'd love for you to talk to us about that.
Yeah. So I actually loved astrology from jump. So I used to get those little star scrolls in the grocery store when I was in the 6th grade. I don't know if anyone remembers those, but that was kind of like the monthly forecast before the internet, because I'm old. And it was just lovely to, my best friend and I would, we'd save our allowance and that's what we would get. And so I just always read my horoscope and things like that. And then I went through a really terrible breakup in my late 20s. And it was one of those ones where you're just kind of like rolling on the floor crying and you think there's no meaning in life. And so I was just doing everything I could to kind of find some meaning in life. And so I went to an astrologer and she was horrible because she didn't prepare. She just told me oh, you're a Cancer, so you like to cook, just really unhelpful. And all I could think was I could do a better job. And so I went right afterwards and I went to a bookstore and I got a book by Steven Forrest called The Inner Sky. And I read that and I realized, oh my God, I could be an astrologer. And so I was 28, 29 years old. And I just really started diving into everything I could. And I started taking his apprenticeship program, which at the time was so much smaller. And I was what was called, I don't remember what they called it, but basically I was before my first Saturn return. Oh, I was an apprentice, but it was I was a young apprentice. That's what it was called. So the woman who ran the program at the time was this super strong Uranian Virgo, and she was hard as nails. And she basically said and I had no money, a lot of, 20-year-olds. And so I couldn't really afford to come to all the trainings and things like that. And so basically you could work it off. And so I had to transcribe all of his teachings. And because then she provided transcriptions to people. So I used one of those old transcription machines with a pedal and things like that. And so I learned astrology so I think it was just like the best learning that I could have done, because it was like I had to like go back and re-listen to things over and over again and to write them down.
Wow.
And then like I would get, discounts to come to the program in Napa, which is where he was. And at the time I lived in Austin, Texas. So it was a bit of an investment for me. And but anyway, so that's what ended up happening. And then fast forward, I really wanted to make a go of it. But this was before social media. So it was before Facebook and before YouTube. And so basically the only thing you could do with astrology at that time was to write for magazines. So I had a career in PR, so I kind of knew how to get in touch with publishers and editors. And so I just started writing for magazines, and it paid nothing, but it was, good exposure.
Yeah.
And so I really, I cut my teeth on very pop astrology too. So I did evolutionary astrology, is what I studied, but then I really did thousands and thousands of more pop astrology horoscopes. And then I met my husband. Then we bought a house. Then I had a kid, and I just started realizing I couldn't do it all. Something had to be put on the shelf. And so I had to pay a mortgage. I had to raise my child. So astrology got a little bit put on the shelf. I always continued to follow it, but the dedication to building my career in astrology had to take a back seat. And now my son is, middle school, and, it's kind of the trajectory that I think a lot of female astrologers, once, the kids are out of the house kind of thing, they actually have the breathing room to come back to what they love. And so that's what I've done. I've decided to come back to it, and I launched a YouTube channel, and I'm talking to other astrologers. And like Susan said, we met in Ann Ortley's apprenticeship group. So it's just kind of jumping back in, and now I'm doing readings again. So
That's really cool. I just want to call out something that I heard. Virgo. You've got a Virgo moon, and you learned and absorbed those hard lessons from that Virgo sun, and from a daily practice of the Virgo moon, you were able to absorb so much of what you know now. So I just wanted to point that out, how cool that was, even though at the time it probably was really hard, sweat labor.
It took my mind off of my breakup. And it also was I didn't have much else going on, in the sense that I just broken up with my boyfriend. A lot of my friends had moved. And so I would work all day, and then I would stay in the office at night and spend, several hours transcribing astrology. And it was just the best training ground that I could have had.
That's amazing.
Small question from my side, why did you buy this book exactly? So Steven Forrest, was it a chance, or you knew the name, or how?
No, synchronicity. Just synchronicity, that was the right teacher for me. And that's kind of how I believe is we find the right people at the right time. And there was just a little paragraph in the back of the book that said, if you're interested in being an apprentice, here's the email to, and then I emailed them.
This is just usual magic, yeah?
Yeah, it's just right. Exactly.
I'm starting to trust that a lot more, the synchronicity. And I know we have both, all have the same trajectory on our nodes. We're all Sagittarian North nodes. And I'm a little late to the game, although lots have happened to me in the meantime, but I'm starting to trust it more and more, and it's starting to deliver. So it's amazing that you were able to I guess get that information and learn from that so early on in your life. Tatiana, do you have anything more you wanted to ask before I start to ask Dabney about her difficulty at the beginning?
You mean, because I was aiming towards your childhood experiences, maybe, or something.
Yeah.
So it's your life in the beginning. If we are not talking about astrology, yeah. So
yeah.
as a part of it, could you please invest some time and expand on this? Just because, as we see in your chart and in our charts, it should be not that easy for you. Your childhood is a source of a lot of problems, was a source of a lot of problems in your adult life.
Yeah, we wanted to talk about that because the difficulty at the beginning is a theme in Dabney's chart. And so we wanted to surface that. And I felt as we learned about your story, it's just so inspirational to see the contrast, I guess, to all of the work you did around your Saturn return, and how that kind of paid off for you in a big way.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I know nothing about human design, so this is really fun for me. And I just want to thank you guys for giving me this opportunity to learn a little bit about human design and to put me in the spotlight, which, you know, I very rarely feel comfortable in the spotlight. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. And one other thing I would clarify and say, I don't think I had any idea about synchronicity at 28, 29 years old. I think that, you know, now I can name that. But I had no language to name anything like that at the time. And that really was, that Saturn return really was kind of a turning point for me. And it doesn't mean it all became roses.
Yeah.
So to kind of let you know about where I came from, I grew up in poverty. I had two very educated parents. So that's kind of an unusual, but there was definitely mental illness. And I grew up in poverty. I grew up in a violent household. It was sort of one of those childhoods that's just like, when I tell people about it, they don't really believe me.
Yep.
They kind of say like, that doesn't seem to fit the stereotype of like what we think of somebody. But you know, it feels very far away to me now, and it feels almost like a different person. Because I really didn't believe in magic. I didn't believe in that I was lucky. I actually believed the kind of family narrative that we were losers and we were unlucky. And that was, you know, that really, really stuck with me. And it wasn't until I went away to college that like my roommate had to like really straighten me out that like, that's not a thing. Like, you know, people aren't just born losers. So I was bullied a lot for being fat and ugly, and we were so poor that like I had to wear the same clothes every day. I mean, like just I felt very hopeless growing up. And I was kind of raised by TV. I was sort of a latchkey kid. So, you know, kind of one of that very Gen X-y sort of like, I think my only hope was like watching TV and knowing that it didn't need to be this way, and that I could like, okay, there's another world out there. Mm-hmm. I just need to get through this to find that.
Yeah. So you understood it quite early in your life, yeah? That you should find yourself somewhere outside your family and these circumstances, yeah?
I always knew that I wasn't the crazy one. Let's put it that way. I always knew that like I wasn't like, this isn't my doing. Like, it's not my fault that we have no money. Like, I kind of knew that. I mean, when I was 14, I started working. Yeah, I worked a lot. And then by the time I was in college, I was working 2 or 3 jobs. Like, you know, I mean, I do have that Virgo moon, and my first house is, it's intercepted. So it has 3 different signs, but all of Capricorn is in my first house. So I have a very strong work ethic, and I'm not afraid to work hard when I think there's a pot of gold at the end for me.
Yeah. It's so interesting and fascinating. And I want to I started to look into the I Ching and how it was related to this human design system. And I discovered some things, some anomalies that is making me question the body graph, actually. But it's interesting that you talk a lot about your work. And when I started to really dig into the I Ching and how this was layered on, I saw that that's not showed here, which sometimes people say, because this is 40 is the love of work. And sometimes in the human design system, people who have the gate 37, Tatiana and I do too, they say that sometimes you reach toward the opposite side. But when I was looking at the I Ching, I actually noticed that gate was filled in for you. And so I'm sort of having some kind of awakening, a veil turning, a light bulb turning on about this body graph. So I just want to tell everybody, I see some themes in here that are very reflective of your experience, but I also want to suggest that when people come to you for counseling, I think this is true in astrology as well, it's important for you to verify people's experience, and because we're all at different levels of our journey, and some of us are more advanced in our journey, some of us are at a different evolutionary stage, which I would think I recognize in Dabney, especially with all the work that she's done, that she's at an advanced stage. And also, there's a concept in Hermetics about being able to step outside of the wheel. Like, we don't have to go and identify with the wheel and the pattern. There's a lot of truth there, but we don't have to be stuck. And what you're saying to me here, what I'm hearing from you, is that you grew up in an environment that made you perceive a certain way, and you were able, from whatever happened in your life, and that was your evolutionary journey, to say, hey, wait a minute, this is a narrative that I've been telling myself. This is what I've been identifying with myself, but that's not who I am. And I think it's important for us to all kind of take a step back from these roadmaps and these imprintings to really come to that same recognition within ourselves that, yes, we can learn from these, we can understand the patterns, we can understand our upbringing, but we can step outside of it. And we don't have to be defined by that. So I just wanted to bring that up.
I love that. I mean, I think it's one of the biggest teachings, and it's one of the hardest teachings, you know, because I think people, our whole lives, we all have a narrative, especially when we're younger. And if we really listen, people are correcting the narrative all along the way. Like, people are telling us that experience for us doesn't have to be true. But a lot of times people can't hear it. And I know I couldn't hear it. When I was in high school, the narrative was there. Like, went on spring break with all my girlfriends, and it was like, no, I'm too fat and ugly. Or, you know what I mean? Like, the narrative, like, despite how many times people would say something to me to the opposite. So actually listening and tuning into what other people are saying that love you, not necessarily like the people that are encouraging you and challenging the negative narratives. It's so much easier to buy into the negative narratives when we already have kind of a negative framework. And so it really does take conscious effort to step outside that narrative. And I agree with you. Some people, I don't know why I was ready at some points in my life, and then others, you get stuck. There are some people that really, don't start to get it until very late in life. The astrology gives us lots of opportunities along the way to get it, but it's hard. It's a lot harder than it is hard to redo your programming and to kind of step outside of it. And it does take lifetimes sometimes.
Yeah. Tatiana, do you have any follow-ups to that question?
Yeah, of course. So the next question would be, so how did you, what helped you a lot with it? So we know astrology, but it came to at a later stage maybe in your life. So first of all, you always felt like you do not belong to this narrative. But as I know already from our previous communications, that you used a lot of therapy to help yourself to change this narrative. Could you please expand on this topic? What helped you the most in this sphere, in psychology sphere?
So I've always been very open, and I always knew that things weren't going well. And I was open, probably too open, to other people's feedback, like kind of like, well, what can I do to fix this? Like, I'm a fixer, right? Like, I'm a Virgo moon, I've got a lot of Cancer, like it's a very cardinal chart. And like, I'm ready to fix it if you tell me what's broken. And so, you have to be somewhat discerning about the inputs that you get. But I did traditional therapy, which I wouldn't say was particularly helpful. I think like there's some help in the sense, like if you've never spoken about your feelings before, like there's different, kinds of people, but I was always very emotive and always very open book. Once I started getting into more non-traditional therapies, like I did a vision quest in the mountains of Utah. For those who don't know, that's where you go and it's a traditional native ceremony. I didn't take any sort of medicine, plant medicine, but I did, not eat, and I didn't have any shelter for 4 days, 3 nights, something like that. I can't remember what it was, but you just bring some water with you, and there's no books, no phones, no, there was not like no tarot cards, like no pen and paper. It's just you and nature. And that was incredibly profound for me because I had to just sit with a lot of grief. And we did some ceremonial things beforehand. And I realized I was 30 years old. So this was right in the heart of my Saturn return. I'd realized like I really hadn't had any happiness up until that point in my life. And I had all these photo albums of like pictures of me with friends, or that it seems like I should have been happy, but there really was a lot of pain. And I burned all those photo albums in the lead up to this. So there was a lot of kind of like purging and saying like, I want to start fresh. Like I want to be reborn. So I also found somebody who, was much more open to things like tarot and astrology that I could speak with. And she was very kind, and she almost was like reparenting. So I think there's a lot of different avenues that we can take if we're open. I mean, I tried everything, color therapy, dance therapy, but I think it doesn't have to be traditional, like you go and sit on a couch and talk to someone and your HMO covers it and you get 50 minutes. Like that's really hard to get progress that way. And a lot of times you're just stuck spinning in a circle. So, you're saying things, but like they're not saying anything back to you, because that's kind of the, in some traditions, at least it was in the 90s and early 2000s, like the zeitgeist of therapy at the time was like, they just listen to you and validate you. Yeah. And like, sometimes you don't need to be validated. You need to be challenged. And I did also see a person in my early 30s who was really challenged my narrative and was like, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, stop living in the past. Like, you're doing this to yourself now. Oh, wow. And he was pretty harsh about it, but he was right. And that I loved, because I actually could see like, oh, I'm being a victim. And like, I'm living in a past that I didn't create. And it's just time to believe the truth that I know deep down inside.
And we're not all ready at the same time. Because I also had experiences with therapy, and I think about it, and I experienced the same thing, where I was challenged somewhat to to change the narrative or to look at it differently, but I didn't really understand what was going on, why I was acting against myself. And these were probably around addiction problems. I was a problem drinker. For a long time, I was trying to find success outwardly to somebody else to validate me. And so it took me, I changed in my Saturn return, but also it actually took me till my Uranus opposition to really come to this place. And then through the experiences with my son, cognitive dissonance a couple of times in that journey to really open up my the flexibility of my mind, to be able to take in something that sometimes we create defense systems, and because we get a lot of feedback that's not great, if we're not discerning. I have a Pisces moon, so you're discerning. You're more discerning than me, and Tatiana does too. So it's like sometimes we take in the people that we shouldn't be listening to. So then you create defense systems that actually keep you holed up longer. And that was my experience. Tatiana, you want to talk about your experience? Do you have anything similar?
Yeah, of course. Like, I'm now actually is the time when I feel that this quest came to an end, and I found the solution. I found the way for me. So I would say like the traditional therapy as we know it helped me a lot, but actually now I see the limits it has, because for the moment I found all my answers in the book that I would be describing in our last section, this complex PTSD solutions. And this is the thing that applies. And why should anyone deal with a depression when it comes from a childhood abuse? and you better address this one. And not, you can spend years describing how bad you feel and how your boss is abusing you. But maybe it is easy to address this initial issue. And this is, for example, here in Berlin, I didn't meet anyone who works in this direction. Only this one problem at a time, the smaller the better. And then you could spend years doing it. You're right. Like a lot of other things that maybe not couldn't be framed as a therapy, I would say helped me a lot. But it was a long journey. Only now when Chiron returned, knocked at my door, I understand everything, how it happened, what was it, why I overreacted so many times and so much harm to myself, and so on and so forth. But it took something like 30 years. I'm really happy for you, Dabney, that it was a bit faster in your case.
Okay, I need to interrupt with a couple of things.
Yes, please.
Okay. One, I did traditional therapy for a long, long time before I did more alternative therapies.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that I don't know that I would have been able to just jump into the alternative therapies. So I think there's value in traditional therapy. And so I may have sort of misspoke. Like, I don't want to give the impression that I'm belittling that, because I actually think that can be incredibly powerful people. I just think there's times where I've seen it, I've experienced it, where you can kind of keep doing the same thing for too long.
Yeah.
Like, so, where it's like, if it's no longer working for you, or you don't feel like you're making progress, maybe it's time to explore something else. So I don't know that I would have been able to just jump right in. Like, that's, and then I also have to say, and even though it seems, I have a very lucky chart. I have, my North Node is in Sagittarius. The ruler of my chart is Sagittarius, and I have Jupiter in the second house squaring my nodes. So everybody's journey is different. And I have to remind myself of this, that like, the more I lean into synchronicity, the more I lean into being lucky, the more I am daring and take risks, the luckier I am. That may not be true for everybody. And that's probably true in human design as well. So like, the more open I am, my chart is like, the angels above are like, go for it. Yes. And like, things start to fall into place. Timing is also everything. So yes, it was the Saturn return, but the bigger piece for me was Pluto came to my nodes. And all of this major transformation happened when Pluto came to my nodes. The North and South Node, for people who are not astrologically inclined, it's a very karmic, sensitive point that, as an evolutionary astrologer, I believe is incredibly potent. And so I go towards my North Node. Pluto came along and said, it's time to completely annihilate and change everything that you ever knew about yourself.
And what age was it? Sorry. So at what age?
It coincided with my Saturn return. So it maybe right after.
Similar to us. Yeah. Because we have similar nodes. Yours is a little after ours. My Pluto came when I moved to New York City, and 9/11 happened right after that. So that completely, but yeah, Tatiana.
Timing though. Yeah, exactly. Because mine was like probably 2002, right? Like 2001 or whatever. Same timing.
Yeah.
Because it's like a 4-year cycle, right? If you really take, with the retrograde motion of Pluto and stuff, it was like a good 3 years for me.
Yeah.
So anyway, yes, exactly. And like, that was like a huge turning point. And I think for everybody, if I see a Pluto doing anything to your nodes, boy, am I going to tell you, I'm going to sit you down and I'm going to say, this is your time to make huge breakthroughs. So you kind of have to look at those opportunities that the planets are giving you, because you can make more progress at other times than others, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty about all of these modalities, because they're about, for an astrology especially, it's about cycles, it's about time cycles, and it's about opportunities. And sometimes life will force you into something, a change, but it can be really harsh, and you can go through a lot of suffering, or you can look at it from a different perspective. And I think that's the biggest gift that astrology has given me, is to realize that these are opportunities and nothing I need to be afraid of. I have to lean into them and try to play them out in a constructive, productive way. I wanted to ask Tatiana, do you remember what was going on in your life around 2001?
Yeah, a lot of things. So first I went, like, let's say, broke. Everything was ruined in my life, and then the biggest job opportunity came to me with international traveling, with organizing jazz festivals, with everything. Like, it was, I received so much from this job. I even met my husband because I was working in the office near his flat, and our friends were connected us. So like it changed completely the direction of my life.
Yeah.
Yes.
Tatiana has Jupiter on her ascendant. Oh, she's got Sagittarius ascendant. I have a Libra. I'm not as lucky, but but I think that's super interesting when we look, because Tatiana and I were born. We've got similar charts, except in human design, but in astrology, our house setups are different. So it's always fascinating to me to compare notes about what's happened, and a little bit like yours is definitely different, but because we have the same nodes, you have similar types of stories, especially the Gemini to the Sagittarius, because the Gemini, from what I've learned in evolutionary astrology, can be, we're born from parents that were like, who are these people? I don't belong here.
Yes.
I am an alien here, and I really don't belong in this. And usually you're in like they say urban environment or whatever, or an educated environment, right? My mom was also very educated, but from poor and from the deep South, and had a lot of distorted thinking, religious thinking, which took me away from spirituality. But we both have Neptune on our nodes. So it's like now I know I had to come back to that in a different way. But it's so fascinating to compare notes because there's similarities, but there's so many differences as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard that, and I love that, because that is exactly how I felt. Like I never understood how I was part of that family. Like I was just like, okay, I just gotta get through it. Like I'll be 18, and I even got a scholarship to like go to college, where it would have been like a total free ride in the same city at like a really prestigious school in my city. I was like, no, I'm leaving. Like there's no way you're gonna keep me here. I'll take the student loans. Like just find me out.
Thankfully, my mom got a job in Arizona where I was born, so I was able to escape it. And she left, and they all left. But I was able to escape, and then I got a scholarship again to get my MFA. I never used that degree, and I spent a lot of time, but it did get me out. And then I moved to New York City, and so it was serendipity. And I think, Tatiana, you have a similar experience, right?
Yeah, so I left home when I was 17. Yeah, but my parents helped me, just because it was always like that. You can study in Moscow or in St. Petersburg, and that's it. There are two good universities in this country. You have to choose between two of them. So I chose St. Petersburg just because city is amazing. I was in love with it since I was a kid. Yeah, but I spent a few years completely alone in St. Petersburg. It was quite a transforming experience, especially at the time when Putin was one of the heads of city administration. Yeah, it was like crazy, like hell, but really interesting.
Yeah, and then
I want to congratulate all three of us that we left home with Sag North nodes. Leave home. Don't stay in the town that you grew up in. Like that's just the first, like, A+.
Yeah. Learning from different, it's kind of our background too, the Gemini, which is learning from the different people, your environment. I've moved a few times, but it's like your environment kind of is very important to your perspective. And it's over those periods, those jumps, that I've learned how different people's perspective, I guess, a lot more. And that's helped me tremendously to where I'm at today with the political environment that we're in. And we can talk about that a little bit, because we started to talk about it. But I wanted to talk about you with this chart, because this chart shows that you have an open throat. And in human design, they say that people with an open throat have a hard time because there's no consistency of a channel that defines their throat. So they have a hard time finding their voice. And sometimes it's hard for them to, either they talk way too much, or because the people that come into their life, they define their throat, or they're very shy and are unable to find their voice. And I wanted to say, from my observations of you, is that you have an extremely strong voice. And people with an undefined voice, like Oprah, they can be tremendous speakers, but at the same time, it's like I kind of like am questioning this idea about the undefined throat. You know what I mean? Because when I experience you, I know that you have had some struggles. We've talked about struggles about your forecasts and doing them on your own, and you're trying to find your voice, which is interesting. But when I experience you and when I listen to you, I'm like, wow, she is such a strong voice and opinions and point of view. So I wonder what your experience is about that, or if you can talk a little bit about that over your period of your life of finding your distinct voice and who you are, because you also have an undefined G center, which means in human design that there's an inconsistent identity. So you can go through a lot of changes and hook into the people that you're around. So I just wanted to see if you had any, this spontaneous question, if you have any experiences around that.
I'm very opinionated. It caused a lot of problems in my life. I offend people sometimes with that. I don't always speak the way I feel. Mm-hmm. So it's funny to hear that I, come across as strong or confident when oftentimes that isn't the internal feeling. So an example was I went on, I was interviewed by a psychic, and I had my, whole spiel that I was talking about Pluto and Capricorn going into Aquarius. And I said something that I didn't exactly mean, but I said it with authority. Mm-hmm. But I kind of was misspeaking, and people got really angry at me. And so a lot of people, I think, like my authoritative tone, but it can cause problems. Sometimes I listen to myself, especially now that I'm doing this YouTube channel, and I'll go back and listen, and it's like I want to cringe. Like I have to cut myself out a lot because I talk too much, like you said. I interrupt people. Sometimes I feel like I'm speaking very authoritatively, but not saying anything particularly interesting. So I have to kind of modulate a little bit, because it's funny because I have Pluto in the 9th house, Sagittarius rising, but I have a lot of Cancer planets. Mm-hmm. I'm very in the 7th house. So I'm very heart-centered, I'm very shy. No one would ever know that about me. So I'm incredibly introverted, but I come across incredibly extroverted. So I think that can be the conflict where, like, I don't put up with a lot. I don't suffer fools. I do think I'm right a lot. And I am willing to, if someone flags me, to take it back and take a breath and connect in from a heart-centered place. And I think that that's much more authentic.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mm. Yes. I frequently have this hard for me with Tatiana, because I feel like I'm a little, because of our interviews, I've kind of known the people that we've brought in, and I've been like, I feel like I'm hogging the stage, because I do hear myself. It's just because I'm curious and I want to ask questions or something, but I have to take a step back and, okay, Tatiana, please speak. And Tatiana is going to be leading our next show. I want everybody to know that, because I want Tatiana to shine a little bit more, but I have to really, and we have a defined throat unconsciously. So, but I recognize, those tendencies. I try not to look at my videos, because I'm a perfectionist, and I frequently find that I've said something completely wrong, and I have to write a little note and say, well, that wasn't really the astrology. I get stuff tongue-tied in my throat, and I get stage fright. And I'm from a big family, so it was survival for me to have a strong throat, because I was like 4th of 9 kids, so it's hard for me to hold back. But that being said, Tatiana, you want to follow up with anything?
I'm looking at gate number 15, and I'm dreaming of asking the questions that, like,
yes, go ahead.
You are the person whose gate 15 is defined, and even though the G center is undefined itself, but it is gate 15 is defined twice, once with your Mars and with your Venus and person. So it means like you are the person who are prone to kind of extremes. Can you expand a little bit on this topic? So how do you perceive yourself in this case?
Yes. So in astrology, that I have my Mars conjunct my moon, and I have a very strong moon because of all the Cancer planets, the big stellium of Cancer. So I love the Mars. I love the extremes in some ways because it means that I am a little bit of a dog with a bone. Like when I put my mind to something, or if someone says I can't do something, I'm going to prove them wrong and I'm going to do it. You know, there's a story about like, I didn't have a crib growing up, but my dad would build all these like obstacles around me to try to make me go to bed, like, you know, walls. And I would like climb over them and like come down and like have a big smile on my face. Like, okay, I did it. What's next? You know? And so
That's amazing.
I think that's a little bit of the way I approach life is, in a very determined way. So there could be some extremes that come with that. You know, I just started my YouTube channel a little over 3 months ago, or exactly 3 months ago, actually. And, you know, I
3 months. Wow. You've done a lot in 3 months. It's crazy.
Right.
And
And
you don't give yourself enough credit.
It's not sustainable. It's exhausting. Sometimes it's really exhausting to be me because like, I'm not really going to settle for like when I had like, you know, 20 followers and like I'd put up like all this content. Like I remember like being so discouraged and like wanting to cry. And I think you were one of the people who was like, would you calm down? It's been like 2 weeks. Like,
I came back.
Astrology Hub tomorrow.
I just wanted to point out that I came back and that's why I love 3 5s. And I don't even care if it's true or not. I see it in you. It's like, I'm like, just respond to what you love. And the next time I see you in Anne's class, you're like, yeah, I joined the psychic and I go back to your show and your channel and you have like thousands of followers and thousands of views. And I'm like,
Yeah, extremes, yeah, that's how it works. Yeah,
that's right. And so it can be exhausting. I know my best friend who comes on she does the forecast with me.
oh, cool.
You know, she also has a Pisces moon, and she is always like, oh my God, could you just like, you make me feel bad. Like, she's like, I'm trying to keep up with you and I can't. And so what I always have to try to explain to her is like, it's slightly exhausting to be me. And that is, but then I also realized like, if I'm not building something, I get depressed.
Yeah.
And like for a couple of years, I wasn't, or at least a year, I didn't take that long off, but there was a good year there where I wasn't building anything new. And I really found myself getting depressed.
Yeah.
So there's part of the extremes. And, you know, like going from poverty to living in like a really pretty house in California. I mean, that's an extreme. So yeah.
That's funny because I feel similarly. I have a lot of internal pressure. And so, but it's different, like I think with the Pisces moon, but I definitely gravitate toward the opposite of Virgo. I think I really did react to that because I did see that through my effort and just going and going and going, that I was able to be successful. Without that experience, I grew up and I floundered a lot. I was lost and I floundered and I was depressed. And I read my journals from way back when, and I was like, oh my God, this tape, I've got to throw these away because the tape was just the same thing. I was like, what is going on? And so I did learn through that I am better when I keep myself busy on something that I enjoy. So sometimes people have responses to that, and I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, but I'm not putting any pressure on you. I'm putting pressure on myself, and I'm sorry that it's impacting you. I'll try not to let it impact you, but I can't help it.
Yep.
Self-driven.
Yeah, I feel that. I feel that way too. And I think my husband and I started getting along a lot better once he accepted that, like, because he's like much more laid back than I am, which is nice, right? You have to have a balance. And like I used to sort of drive him crazy because like I went from project to project. It's like, okay, we're gonna remodel the house and like we're gonna do it in like this amount of time. And like, okay, now I'm starting a business. Now I'm doing this. Now I'm doing that. And like, and then I think what he actually saw was when I didn't do something, like how unhappy I was. That then it kind of sunk in for him that like, oh, that's just how she operates. And like, that's how I have to realize that's how he operates, is if he kept the pace that I keep, he would be really unhappy. He needs his downtime way more.
Yeah, I've started to accept both sides of myself because I definitely have times where I just can't move. And Tatiana, you move a lot. Like I think you express that energy differently than I do, but it's through your movement, it's through your exploration. Do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Oh, like I'm moving a lot, living in a very big city like Berlin. Yeah, but actually, I would say this old tapes of your past, the way that everything is. By the way, I didn't tell it, but I do understand. First 30 years of my life, I was unhappy, even though I was living in one of the most beautiful cities in the world, in the very center. I managed to go to the university. I had friends there and so on. But like when I look back, it was a permanent depression, like for years. That was my state. Yeah, and this all came back after immigration. Yeah, that was important for me. Important to notice when you immigrate, when you're so stressed, then it all can, how to say, you are reacting all these old tapes. It is really hard to manage it properly. Now I have it all under my control. So, but this movement, but permanent activism in my life helped me a lot to survive simply. Because if not this, then immediately depression state comes back. Yeah, so I don't know what to say. So all these hardships of immigration, but if not that, then what would happen to me? I don't know. Like I was really busy for some years learning new language.
Three languages you have. Three languages you've learned. I could never have done that.
So my life looked like life forces me. Now I think like maybe it is already time just simply learn new things, and that's it, quietly at your table, just like astrology, human design, a lot of interesting stuff. No more revolutions, please.
Yeah, life always has new revolutions for us. But I love so you've got the 360, which means it's difficulty at the beginning, but it's also that you go through these periods. And I know that you can see that in your astrology chart, is just like you go through these periods of transfer. It's in a pulse, but total transformations, like a complete, like you just told us about all of the different extremes. Like it's a complete, what do you call that? What do you call that term?
Like core, or like she rebuilds herself like a few times. Do you feel it like that? Like you're 3 or 4 different persons?
I think there's different phases of my life. I do think that there's been a continuity of personality for sure. Like I can recognize the same person that I was at 16 as I am today. What has changed? And I think this is true for a lot of people that just mature, frankly, and that work in a healthy way and understand themselves. I see this like when I do the readings of younger people versus older people. Whether you suffered abuse or not, whether you had hardships growing up, life is hard for everybody. And we don't really know ourselves. It's very hard to know yourself growing up. It takes time. It takes experience. It takes wisdom. So, yes, and I also want to kind of be clear that like at 30, my life didn't like suddenly get awesome. Like I still was single for several years. I worked for narcissistic, abusive people. Like, I still attracted some challenging energy to me, but you can break free from it. And I think it just is about really like tuning into being conscious. And so, yes, there is sort of a rebirth. Like right now, like I'm kind of reinventing myself from a corporate career to really leaning into, you know, my astrology and having a YouTube channel. I'm also a lot older and wiser to realize like, I don't know where it's going. I'm trying to have a degree of detachment.
Mm.
I'm throwing myself into it, but I'm also knowing that I'm going to be led where I need to go. And this might not be the thing, but for now, I'm enjoying it. And so, again,
So you're that open to any kind of developments, yeah, whatever comes.
It's about being open, right? It's like, you know, and I also think like everybody's different. Like I did a reading for a woman the other day, and she had a lot of Gemini, and she didn't, you know, but she was intelligent, and she didn't follow a traditional path.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like she needed to be reminded that that was okay. And I think that's the thing, is like we don't accept ourselves. Like we have like this, whether it's our parents or society or some combination of everything that tells us we have to be a certain way that might not be congruent with who we really are.
Yeah.
That's the wisdom, I think, piece. And that's the wisdom piece that not everybody gets. Sometimes ever.
Yeah.
That like I can't be what I have to be true to myself.
Yeah. I think that's the best gift that human design gives, even though sometimes people distort things. But I think the best gift that human design, what I took away from it, is this journey toward loving self and not being conditioned by what other people, like you said, homogenized by what other people say that you should be like. And I think that's definitely true for me. And I'm still on that journey. You know, it's hard to navigate with other people because, you know, you have to make certain compromises with people. But how can you do that in a way that still is honoring yourself, you know?
With my YouTube channel, it's been interesting, you know, as I'm putting out political content. So to some degree, I'm pretty kind of owning my political stance. I'm still trying to do really solid astrology behind that, but you know, I'm getting negative comments as well. I'm getting, you know, and the only ones that hurt are the ones where like people criticize me personally, where and they talk about like how I'm you know, I interrupt people too much or you know, something like that. But what's funny is like I do feel like it's a really good opportunity for me to not care.
Detach.
Right. Like to kind of be like, okay, that's a projection. Like I know where I can grow, but I don't have to like have a super self-critical tape that plays in my head. I can take feedback. I can, you know, but I have to let it go. And so that's kind of you know, like that again, like, I don't know that I would have been able to do that when I was younger.
No.
Of course,
I think this experience for me being on the internet publicly, you're off of the internet. I want to go, because I know we're running short on time, but I want to go into your Uranus opposition, because we asked a very specific question around this idea of the themes, but I just wanted to also just confirm or validate. I started to do a public profile. And before that, I was always very opinionated and vocal and very opinionated in my family. And I've gone through many cycles of being opinionated and realizing, oh, I'm just being just exactly like they are with my opinions. So I've really transmuted a lot of things, but also I'm such a scaredy cat. We have our sun below the horizon. And so there's a lot of me just like kind of experimenting, but not really wanting to be in that limelight. So it's a weird conflict, because, you know, you're like, okay, well, I've got to build this business. I got to get paid and I want to create, but I have to be able to handle the negative with the positive. And it's hard to do that.
Yeah, and
without
I think
fear.
that it has to be a labor of love to do something like this. And also, I think people don't realize like how much work it is that you don't get paid, that, you know, it's not. And so, I mean, it's a choice. We're making a choice, but like sometimes I wonder, like, why is it that somebody like that makes me sad for them that they have to like tear someone else down to feel like there has to be some element of like these trolls that like they just feel so badly about themselves that they have to like say something mean to someone else.
Viewing it from a compassionate lens, I think, is helpful, because otherwise it really does start to get to you. And it's almost like I've really come to understand that how we see others is really a reflection of how we see ourselves. Really, it is.
Yeah. Like the incredible, like I've never, you know, sought out somebody who is trying to put something positive out in the world to say something nasty to them. Yeah. And so, you know, they're right. Like there has to be something like you're that unhappy, you know, like that's like, you know, you don't have enough compassion for yourself clearly. Yeah. If you can't, you know, because we're all connected. And so, yeah.
So I wanted to talk about, I'm going to bring out the astrology chart, and I'm not going to go too deep into the chart itself, but I wanted to bring it in here because this is your Uranus opposition. And if you can see in this chart, I need to get a circle where I can like pinpoint, but the Uranus opposition is you have a Chiron opposition with your Uranus, and it's in the 4th house. And so when Uranus came back, you know, in 2016, and I had heard, I always like this, I hear something and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I heard on a video that you were like, oh, I got off the internet. I want everybody to encourage everybody to go view your YouTube channel, because there was somebody that you interviewed that's just amazing, and there were quite a few interviews that you did that I was like, oh my god, this is so awesome. So I'd encourage everybody to go visit, and I'll put it below this video. But I heard in that you said I got off of Facebook in 2016. That was during your Uranus opposition. And I was like, well, I wonder if, because you haven't had your official Chiron return, although you've had it in some senses, you know, but you've already had it kind of with that Uranus. So it's like I was curious to see if there were any familiar themes that were coming up that you already had kind of experienced during your Uranus opposition. So I'd love for you to walk maybe if you know, we have a limited time, but if you have any time to kind of walk people through that experience. I think it involves politics. So I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah. So it's funny because at that time, I really wasn't paying attention to astrology at all. I was really focused on my corporate business. I don't even think I knew I was going through my Uranus return. So when you brought that up, it's sort of like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. I hadn't even really looked back and examined it. So Uranus was the opposition, but it was like right on my Chiron. And that's right when Donald Trump got elected. And I kind of had a sinking suspicion that he would be elected, and everyone kind of told me no. And it really triggered a lot of childhood pain. And, you know, because my Chiron's in the 4th in Aries. And like I kind of said, I grew up you know, I know narcissism very well. And I knew that this person was big narcissist. And I know how much damage that malignant narcissists can do. And so it really sort of shook me. And I cried for 2 days. And I did get off of Facebook because I wanted to give a finger to everybody that I felt like was complicit in putting our country in this much peril. And what's also sort of, as an aside, I'm a Cancer sun in the 7th house with Sagittarius rising, just like the United States. The United States has 4 planets in Cancer in the 7th house, and so do I. So the United States also has a Chiron in Aries. So I have a lot of resonance with the United States chart, and I've always been very patriotic. When I went, anyway, I don't want to get too far off, but there was something like I just internally knew how dangerous this was. And so it sent me into a bit of a panic. And I wouldn't say it was the healthiest year of or 6 months. I would say there was a good 6 months where like, you know, I turned a little prepper and I was like, my friends were like, all right, she needs to calm down. It's going to be okay. So then I, again, here's, I guess, the reinvention. I, took a few deep breaths eventually. And I went and I found a really good yoga class, and that was very spiritually based. And it reminded me, like, we don't need to react to everything, and that there is a higher purpose for why things happen. And we sometimes don't like the way things are happening. And sometimes things have to be destructive in order to move us to a higher place. I think the video you're talking about is a man named Ronnie Pontiac. And I just found him synchronistically. He's not like some big astrologer. No one in the astrology community knows who he is. So it's really weird that I even reached out to him, and he was like the first guest I had on my show. And it's a highest, like, it has something like 16,000 views.
Such an amazing interview series. I mean, I just want to say that the chemistry between both of you is just amazing.
I love that. I think that's fantastic, because I know people have also said like they go to his channel and they don't resonate as much with like that content. Yeah. There is something about, kind of the chemistry. So anyway, I think what that was all about for me, my Uranus return was, and that triggering of the Chiron was like coming to that realization that I don't need to react to everything, that there is a purpose and a balance, because my Uranus is in Libra. So finding that inner equilibrium, finding that balance. I'm still not on Facebook. I still won't go back on Facebook. I still think that they suck. And I know that that's damaging to me in some ways, because like I could probably get my voice heard in another way or another channel. But bottom line is, like, I have Pluto in the 9th. I have very strong integrity and boundaries around things when I feel strongly about, and I'm not going to turn my back on that. But I have an Instagram account. So let's be real. Okay. So I'm very aware of all this. Anyway, here we are. I hope that answered your question. But like, I found like this inner peace that like reminded me, like, okay, that's right, Dabney. Don't forget. There's a reason these things happen. Oh, and what I was going to say about the Ronnie Pontiac is I love what he talks about squares. He basically says, like, squares, you can fall down. Like, it's, you need that grist for the mill to like get you to a higher place. Like the stairs, you can climb them, you get to a higher place.
I liked him because he had a lot of depth, and it wasn't just one-sided. Like, some people get very polarized, and I do too. But it was a lot of depth to what he was talking about, and I really enjoyed that, because it was around what is the evolutionary journey for the United States and for everybody that's going through these. We've learned a ton. I just want to point out that you have your North Node and Jupiter, your Jupiter lucky star, and it's Jupiter is the ruler of our North Node. It's up here in Virgo, and you have the Neptune down here on your South Node, which is conjunct here and Saturn in the patterns that I see in this chart is just amazing when you look at the Chiron return, because now you're having a reverse. You're having a reverse nodal situation. This is your exact hit of your Chiron return in 2025. So you've got this return of themes, like you said, but it's in a different place. Like, you're having the reverse of that. And so you're bringing and you've got Neptune's, down here, next to Venus here. And that's right on your 4th house cusp. And so it's like, that's a good omen, because it's a benefic, and you're going to have your Mars return up here. Mars is in Leo, and I just love to see these patterns. And Jupiter's here, right on your, approaching your cusp and your South Node. So there's a lot of repetition of themes, but it's like a revisiting of that time to go deeper and possibly to have another evolution. I'm sure it's going to be another evolution of understanding and unwrapping some of the things that you went through, I guess, in 2016 to go into a new level of understanding or a new evolution of who you are. So I thought that was very interesting. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, having the Jupiter come up on that south node, I'm looking forward to finding out what that's going to be all about. But I haven't really paid attention to the fact that my Neptune will be entering my 4th house, so that'll be interesting. And I will say that I am very envious of Ronnie Pontiac's eloquence. That is something that.
Well, he was, isn't he a rock star? Like he has that, he just has that charisma, natural charisma. I haven't really looked, actually, I have not, I'm a dabbler and I'm one of those type of people that I'm led where I'm led. So I did go to his channel and I was like, I'm not really that interested, but his videos I watched one after the other. I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. And I do want to visit him again, but he definitely has a natural charisma. But when he first came onto your show, what I thought was funny, he had this blue light coming at him. I'm like, what is that on purpose? Because there's like this blue light on him. And I'm like, he just has some kind of natural chemistry. But I will have to say that it is in the combination of you both that I saw the charisma more. And I also will say that he's been doing this for a very long time. And I know you've been an astrologer for a very long time, but you haven't had your YouTube channel for a very long time.
I've not been a public speaker ever. So, and he has since the 80s, or 90s or something like 90s. So yes, he has like a whole background in giving presentations for esoteric topics. And his North Node is in the 10th house conjunct Jupiter. So he's,
gifted, blessed.
He is. Yeah.
So keep going, Dabney, because
come on, you should do his human design. Maybe
I'm not as brave as you are like that. I'm like, oh my God, you invite. Okay, I also want to recommend Anne, or at least you kind of have to be into astrology and you have to understand it somewhat, but you interviewed Anne Orley too. I would have, and then, Steven Forrest, of course, you have a relationship with him, but I was like, oh my God, all these powerhouses. I wouldn't even think to ask somebody from.
You should.
I'm like, we don't have enough people, subscribers, blah, blah, blah. But you're right. You just never know what's going to happen and that's what I love about the 3-5 is this experimental nature. You've been in PR, so you've been more behind the scenes, but you understand innately what attracts attention. And the framing of things, and all you need to do is kind of develop that voice, which you are, and you've done an amazing job in 3 months. I'm fascinated with it. So I'm going to keep following you and learn from you. And I hope you keep doing it, and I hope we keep in touch.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And if you guys have an astrological thing that you'd like to talk about, I do interview people on my channel. I'm happy to have you on.
That'll be fun. I need to do more experiments that way.
And one more reason to visit your wonderful, wonderful website. I'm really, truly impressed the way it is done with all the artworks. And I definitely recommend everyone in esoteric field who wants to see how the good side can look like, visit your website, not only your YouTube channel.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I love the hummingbird motif that you have. Do you want to talk? We didn't really go through that. The hummingbird about it's almost about the synchronicity, right? What was it about the hummingbird that you?
So the hummingbird came to me when I was going through that really transitional time in my life, and I started learning astrology and stuff, and I was at a retreat, and there was a hummingbird that was very strange. I found a hummingbird that had passed away, and everyone was like, oh my God, and started telling me about what a hummingbird medicine is and things like that for people, animal spirit guides and things like that. And then when I did my vision quest, I came back and we all kind of witnessed each other's stories and stuff. And I have no idea about this, but apparently I was sobbing hysterically, and there was hummingbirds all around me the whole time, and I had no idea. And so I just really have always resonated with hummingbirds and find them very magical creatures. And they're supposed to be messengers of the gods. And so I think astrology, I think they're magical. And I think that they are a message from something bigger than ourselves that we can then ground into this reality to help us connect into the magic.
Yeah. And then there was a painting on you, we didn't get to that story, but wasn't that from the charity? I mean, just amazing, your stories.
Oh, you're so sweet. God, I feel so good about myself after talking to you, because
that's how you should.
Always. Way cooler than I am. But I did decide to, after coming out of the pandemic, I was like really fired up because the Equal Rights Amendment had just passed in Virginia, and that was the 34th state they needed to ratify. And I really felt like, oh my God, they're finally going to pass the Equal Rights Amendment. Anyway, we're not going to talk about why that hasn't happened yet, but you can probably figure it out. No obstacles really, but anyway, so I just was like, I want to help this charity that's helping to get it ratified and in our Constitution. And so I reached out to a bunch of artists to create artwork for the Equal Rights Amendment. And one thing led to another. And again, I think this is something like where being bold for me and my personal chart leads to good things. Like I found this artist that I really liked. I asked him, he knew Shepard Fairey. He got Shepard Fairey to do one. And Shepard Fairey, if you don't know, he does like, he's a very famous street artist who did the Hope and Change posters for Obama. That's kind of where a lot of people who don't know about art know of him. So anyway, I got 28 artists. I put on a huge art show. I raised $65,000 for this charity in one night. And it was in one night, but it was like 7 months of a lot of work.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite artists from that was a man named Miles Toland. And one of the pieces of artwork on my website you can purchase, and it goes to the charity because it's one of my favorite.
Yeah.
And that
beautiful
image was one of the images from the art show.
I wanted to go back to it because it's so beautiful. And,
yeah,
and then we'll let you go.
And so also he designed the hummingbird and the lotus too.
Oh, he did. Oh,
yes,
wow.
Miles Toland, incredible artist. If you like this style, like he's got just beautiful stuff. And so, you know, first million I make, I want to get an original for.
Oh my God, I'm definitely gonna check him out. I just love the colors and I love the star, and yeah, it's very beautiful.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So yeah, you can get that print, and you know, the prints are not that expensive and all the money goes to charity.
Oh, awesome. I'm going to check that out after we get
and I have a link on my website too, right underneath the actual print.
And we will link to you below this episode.
Awesome.
So everybody can see it.
Yeah. Artists.
All right.
All right.
I know you have to go. We're going to go on to our judgment, so feel free to drop off.
Thank you for
you have a session, but thank you so much for coming on. It was
great.
I've
got a little more time. I'll stick with you. I'll just listen, and,
okay.
and if I need to drop off, I will. But I want to thank you, ladies, for having me on. It's really fun to have somebody focus on me for a change. Like,
yeah, it was such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure for us, definitely.
Okay, judgments. Now we're going to talk. Tatiana, you go first.
Okay, so I go first, and I can tell you like only good words about this book, Pete Walker, and his complex PTSD from surviving to thriving. I bought it like, okay, there is a lot of information about complex PTSD and on the internet, not in a academic community, I would say, or like this information is approaching, so in preparation phase. This diagnosis is not yet listed as a medical, like substantial medical one, but still everything written in this book, and actually the book was published in the beginning, the 2003 or 2006, long ago. But if I only had a chance to read this all, the first and most important outcome for me is that like flashback, we know all that post-traumatic stress disorder is connected with intense flashbacks. Yeah, when you live once again all the terrible things that happened to you. But when we talk about the complex trauma, well, like little by little, day by day, you're traumatized by the people surrounding you, and especially at the very gentle age, like before you even start to talk or work. Then this flashback, it takes another form. It's an emotional one. And once you read it, like everything comes into place. Immediately, within 1 hour, I understood that every time I face people who are rude to me, or behaving in a proper way, because I was like, not so I do not want to dive deep into details of my childhood, but like it was an abuse, like it was generational abuse, I would put it like this, because I do not want to know in details what happened to my parents in their
Yeah.
childhood. It was even more dramatic. But every time you experience some kind of difficult, troublesome situation, comes emotional, some trigger comes, comes emotional flashback, and you are back into this emotional level of a very small child, and that's how you feel. And for example, immigration was a huge trigger for me, and my so two most important outcomes, like this emotional understanding of a flashback, so you can not see maybe anything, but you are emotionally back to the state of 1-2-year-old child, and that's how you feel, and you relive this drama again and again on emotional level. And second thing that is truly important to remember, that this your inner internal critiker who is not letting you do anything. It's not a perfectionism. It's a bully that lives inside you, and you think that this is you. This is only a voice of your parents or the persons who were rude to you when you were a child. This is not you. And this magical experience, like I suppose it is allowed to talk about it. The first time it happened to me when I was 21, and we smoked some marijuana in my college. So with my university friend, and like it feels like something falls down from your eyes, and you see yourself without this critic who is always present and tells you that you are like not good enough, you did nothing, you are nothing, and so on. And it stays with you the whole life. And the main task is to make this critic like smaller, smaller, and smaller. There are techniques you can use, and it looks for me now that all the other stuff like depression or any kind of panic attacks or whatever, it all comes from this source when you didn't resolve this problem, this emotional state inside you, when you are not learning how to see it immediately. Oh, now I see, like I'm triggered. Now I'm gonna overreact. I would be in my emotional state. My brain is not functioning properly. And you also have to understand, we also have to understand that we are wired differently because of this early childhood experience. Our brain works differently. It overreacts to a lot of things. It's like neurological symptoms. It's not some kind of fairy tale. You're like reacting different. Your brain is formed in a different way, and you couldn't expect any usual reaction. And that's this feeling like, why is it so hard for me to live the normal life? Just because.
Yeah.
And what is also sort of just small remark for us Russians, I would say, not for all the citizens of states like similar to Russia with the political situation and all this history dramas. This is also can be inherited. So I suppose why it works so strong for me, just because my mother had it 10 times stronger, because 1 month old she was transferred to Stalin's nursery because her mother had to go back to work, and what it's like terrible kids were dying there like after 1 month. And same I see in my friend, and her mother was born in jail because her grandmother was there because of Stalin and so on. And she doesn't reflect it, but you can see it. Like it's
Yeah.
now I understand why sometimes she overreacts or whatever. So a
Yeah.
lot of things. I definitely recommend to read this book for everyone who sees like, okay, something is not. I feel myself like an alien in this world sometimes, and I had a troublesome childhood, and I want to leave it in the past. I want to live my life completely the way I am. I can do it.
I now recognize this guy, the Tao of Fully Feeling. I read, I didn't read the whole thing, but I read it when I was in the middle of trying to accept that I was an emotional being, because I have similar, even though it's totally different, and you grew up in probably harsher environment than me. I have that same, I had a lot of trauma and a lot of, like you mentioned, overreacting, because my brain is wired to not be able to handle outer stress very well. And so, but it was made worse by me not embracing that I'm an emotional being and actually allowing those emotions to be able to comfort myself as a child, in the way that I comfort my son. I just was not able to get past that point, and I never really understood why. I would medicate myself basically and hide and keep going through the same situations, which would trigger my my overreactions, and then I feel guilty about it. And like you said, I had a harsh Capricorn is on my south node, so a very harsh inner critic. And I was just abusing myself over and over again.
Yeah, self-abuse. That's it. Self-abuse. Like, then it happened so many years ago, but you're continuing to abuse yourself. Feel like, what the hell?
It's because we need to feel like, in some senses, it's comfortable. That's why, I mean, our minds are made for us, and we don't realize that they're doing things that help us cope. And in some ways, it was comfortable for me. I thought I couldn't accomplish anything without being a bully to myself. And in some ways, when you look at the outer self, it is true. Sometimes that really did, like people telling me I couldn't do something. I resonated with that, Dabney. I'm like, if you want me to do something, you just tell me I can't, because it was a driver for me. So in some senses, like, your kind of mind knows that, but at some point it cripples you, and you have to kind of come and say, oh, well, this really pattern isn't working for me anymore. But it takes a long process. That's why they say 7 years of deconditioning, because it's not like you're going to be able to do this in a, and I've been through therapy many, many years as well. But until you're really ready, then you ask, and and then you go through the work that you need to. You have to be willing, I think, to go through the work, no matter what people share with you. If you're not willing, if you're not open, you're not going to be able to hear them. So yeah, I'm glad you found this book, and I'm going to check it out as soon as I. My opening of my books. I want to talk about this book because I'm starting to trust my intuition a lot more. I have problems with authority and teachers. I didn't talk about my evolutionary astrology teacher because I had some conflicts with him. And I went through the whole thing, but I ended up feeling that there was a split. And I couldn't move forward. And so I asked myself, I started to listen to who is inviting me places a lot more. And that's the invitation for me. I'm listening to signals. And I'm also understanding that it's actually better for me not to get too emotionally involved with a teacher. And so sometimes that means that I'm experiencing teachers, and I believe everybody's a teacher for me, but sometimes that means I'm experiencing teachers from a distance through books or other things. And very interestingly enough, Ray Grass came up in the astrology community. I'm one of those people that I don't really... I'm not a proactive, like, I know different astrologers, but I'm not like a proactive. I'm not into like, oh, I got to find the best astrologer and that's how I just kind of discover them. And so I know that he's a well-known, but I haven't really dug into too much about Ray, but everything that I've read, he's a great photographer, a great storyteller, everything that I've read and has been awesome. And so he made this post. And it had something that he wrote in this book with Shelley Trimmer, and it brought me back to my experience with other spiritual guides, and it was familiar to me. And it was about the chakras and getting off the wheel. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. It kept coming back to me, this old experience. I must need to experience this again, or I must need to pick this up. So I went, and I was going to save the book. but it was like $6.99 on my Kindle, and I was like, okay, I'll just add it now. I'll just add it and I'll read it later. But for some reason, it hooked me, and that's how books are for me. It either hooks me or it doesn't. And I noticed Shelley Trimmer right away, and I got his chart a little bit later, and I realized, okay, I understand why I resonate with him. His Uranus is on my sun, and my Uranus is on his sun, and my midheaven is on his ascendant. And if it's timed correctly, but I understood why he resonated with me. But I actually thought if you actually read about him, he's one of those people that wanted to keep a low profile. He studied under Yogananda. He was from Pennsylvania, Dutch country. He learned magic at a very early age. He had the gift of sight and was quite gifted at astral projection. And he studied under Yogananda. He went and searched for him, but he did not want to become he kind of kept a very low profile, worked and provided for his family by working in an electronics store. He was scientific, so he did a lot of experimenting with his spirituality and all of these things. This fascinating person, but he understood the trappings of becoming well-known like Yogananda, and he didn't want that life. And I was like, oh my God, I've got to look at his chart, because maybe he has, our design sun is what is it? Money.
Money is not everything. Yeah.
It's not everything. I was like, oh my God, I wonder if his sun is there. And it wasn't, but it was very near, in, the Uranus connection there. And so I was like, oh, it's so fascinating, because there's, I have my North Node and Neptune in my second house. So I've been experiencing what it means, like spirituality and money and all of the things about it. And, and I understood specifically that there's something that I really admire about a spiritual teacher I trust a little bit more, who's not in it for the fame or money or whatever. But then I understand there's something in there for me to explore a little bit more, because this has been a theme too. I don't think that people necessarily should live in poverty, but I resonated with that story so much, and I trusted him so much more. It was funny, but I was drawn to him regarding that. So I thought that was might have been a theme. But then Ray told me that mystics frequently have. He had heard from another person that he studied with that they had a trine and also a square. I think I'm going to have to revisit this maybe, but I think he said a trine and a square to Uranus or something, or I can't remember if that was the planet. Anyway, I'll come back to that. But I wanted to highlight something that I heard from his book. He's also writing a follow-up book to this, which he'll release pretty soon. But it's a fascinating book. I recommend it to anybody, and I'm also very eager to read the second book. He has a lot of knowledge. And along the lines of things that I've previously learned, but even just much more in depth. I really enjoyed that interview. But one of his part of his book led me to start researching the different number systems, where I discovered something that kind of blew my mind and is making me question the human design system. He talks about the astrological system as a 12 system. The Kabbalah is more of a 10 system, or 22 if you go with the Hebrew alphabet. And there are other systems based on different patterns, like the geomantic system, which is a 16 system and which exists simultaneously with the 12 system. And it says you can think of this as being like different keys or modalities in music. Composers can write great music in any of the keys or modalities. They're just different ways of vectoring into the truth. Which one is the right one? Each one has its own truth, its own relation to the truth, to the center. And I feel like I've been experiencing that at a very, in-depth kind of way. And so I see truth in human design, but I'm starting to put together the pieces to be able to step outside of the map and to not just identify. Like I think a lot of people get so identified with these
the body graphs, you mean? Yeah, the system itself, yeah.
And even Ra mentioned, I think he's a brilliant black magician, he called himself. And I think there are things that I think he purposely did, but he always said the body graph is your not self, which I think is an interesting way to look at it. So when you're identifying with your not self, that's interesting. It's something to think about.
Mm. Okay, it should be definitely an interesting book. So maybe I would also find time to have a look at it. I love such a kind of mystic, unusual one who's not selling himself, who's doing it for the thing itself.
People would. He would come out and they would seek him out. So he did have students, but he was hard to reach, and would definitely only do it when he felt called to do it. And so it kind of reminds me of the Fool on the Hill. I think he was a 3-5-2, which is interesting. Maybe I'll talk about his chart a little bit, but you'll definitely resonate with him, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
because it's like the best thing. Like, my favorite Tibetan Buddhism, like the best teachers, they do not know the rituals. They live somewhere on the top of the mountain. They look like a usual peasant and so on. And then the people were searching for these teachers because this is the real knowledge.
Exactly. And it's in depth. That's why I almost, and he recommended a book that I'm going about, and I discovered another astrologer that I'm looking into, but it's about seeking the truth. And if you really want to know the truth, then you'll be shown the truth. And I also wanted to bring up, the channelers. The people who receive, like Ra did, who received knowledge of a voice, oftentimes that's from Hermes, and Hermes can be a trickster. And so I think about that, so what is the truth? And if you really are a seeker of truth, you'll be able to let go of things when you find it, because sometimes people are so identified. Like, I've been exploring this idea of what happened to me since I went through this experience with my son, and all the cognitive dissonance that I've experienced over many years has really opened my mind to be, oh, well, this is a shame. I don't want to let go of this thing because I've identified with it. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, I have to be able to let go of something. If I discover something else that shows me that there's something that breaks apart, I have to look at it, and I have to, and I think I'm able to do that because I've had the path that I've had. But I'm still looking. I'm going to do a full investigation, and we'll talk about what I discovered more.
Please get back to this, because it starts to be really interesting.
Yeah. Life is full of surprises.
And by the way, the same thing with me. I also, like, with the book. I also thought, like, okay, I'm gonna save this book, and maybe the one that I talked recently about. Joman is trying to find a way in my head. Sorry,
that's okay. I can't even imagine.
Yeah, and I thought, like, good, but it was like 6 something. Like, I better buy it, and I bought it. Just 3 seconds later, I understood, like, oh God, I found it. I found my answer.
The key to the puzzle. That's awesome. I'm going to check. I still have to check it out, but I appreciate it.
€6, like $7. It's not that expensive.
I know. Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah. Okay. Another episode. It was a great one, I thought.
Yeah. I also think we are really thankful to Dabney, and thank you, Steven, for preparing, for finding all these possibilities for us to grow.
You're next.
You're interesting people.
You're next.
Okay.
Right, we'll see you next week.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody who survived until the end.
Bye.
Bye.